Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in this, the clown decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. And today we are going through Jack Saint's video about the South Park Pandaverse special episode and how it signals the end of woke. Because there is nothing I find more entertaining than someone trying to claim they don't know what the hell woke is, while at the same time basically defending it, and then bringing up Gamergate for absolutely no reason whatsoever. So as usual, let's not waste any time and just get right into it.
So in a recent special of South Park, Cartman is lying in bed at night, haunted by nightmares of him and his friends being slowly replaced by women of colour, something he blames on Kathleen Kennedy.
Yes, and it's a very, very funny joke. Pretty much everyone has noticed that this has been happening. That a rather large way that films are being marketed is how diverse they are. This is a good film because of the diversity of cast. We're giving voices to women, we're giving voices to black people. It's representation, X, Y, Z. Nothing about the writing of the film, nothing about the quality of the characters, or why people should go to it beyond the fact that they get to see women and diverse people. I mean, Disney is so obsessed with this type of thing, they even have an entire dashboard showing off the fact that they have many, many women in their directors, producers, writers, and series regular or leads positions. And of course, they have a lot of non-white people in those positions as well. And naturally, Disney think the higher these numbers are, the better. And there's another graphic on their main diversity and inclusion page that again indicates that all diversity means is that you have less white people and less men on your staff payroll, along with throwing out money to charities and suppliers that again aren't white men. And Disney are free to do this all they want, they just need to not be surprised when their stock starts to tank and people decide they don't want to see their films as much because they are just inundated with this propaganda.
And it turns out that these aren't actually nightmares, but a glimpse into another universe he is then abruptly sucked into. Hijinks ensue, and there is the revelation that this is the result of Kathleen Kennedy's actions.
Yes, because as shown in the show, Kathleen Kennedy got very lazy and thought that the absolute best way to pander to audiences was to have more diversity in it. And there's a panda stone which essentially gave her the power to write this woke propagandistic media. And the picture I have on screen shows exactly what South Park are getting at. This is exactly how many mainstream films are being marketed today. The Force is female. Last Jedi had a load of anti-capitalist messages along with animal rights messaging, and that to really move on with your life you have to kill the past, which is a bit more than move on from the past and remember it. And they're all just from The Last Jedi. Things didn't improve with The Rise of Skywalker, and things definitely haven't improved with Mandalorian and Ahsoka. The only one you could say is particularly good is Andor, but unfortunately that's not done as well, because for some reason the Star Wars audience at this point is just full of brain-dead children who want to see things that they've seen a million times before. But really this also does go beyond Star Wars. Indiana Jones is another great example, as in the new film that everyone forgets exists, The Dial of Destiny, Phoebe Waller-Bridge played a woman called Helen Shaw, who is Indiana Jones's goddaughter. And many trailers and clips in the marketing as it was coming out were focusing on this is the new character that's going to have a heavy part in the story, and almost seemed like she'd be more capable than Indiana Jones. And as it was coming out, there was talk from Phoebe Waller-Bridge of the possibility of leaving Indiana Jones behind and carrying on with Helen Shaw in the next few films. As she says, there is no replacing Indiana Jones in any way, but I feel like the character herself, she did feel fresh on the page, and there is a sense of, is there room in the world for someone like this? So I do think there's room for a slightly clumsier, bruised, limping female action star maybe in the future. I think they really achieved something extraordinary. She fits into the canon and she feels like there is certainly an energy that she shares with all the characters that have come before, especially with the female parts, but she is unique and she has a fresh voice. She was somebody who was mysterious from the off. I think Indy's often been the mystery to those characters before, especially his female counterparts, and I think there's something really unusual in how they flip that here. So obviously, again, it's just she is a slightly more capable woman than the previous women, which, to be honest with you, in the previous Indiana Jones films, the only completely incapable woman was Willie Scott from the Temple of Doom, who really was just an damsel in distress the whole time, and as South Park put it, was only there because she was humping the director. However, once again, Phoebe Waller-Bridge in these quotes are effectively saying she is completely different from the last women, because she is more of an action star, and so because of that, we could possibly see her becoming a spin-off in the future. However, when asked, the director of The Dial of Destiny had simply no desire to make a spin-off with Helen Shaw. I refuse, I just can't do it. The amount of lore, Easter eggs and fan service starts to become antithetical to any of the stuff at a certain point. It isn't storytelling anymore, it's large-scale advertising. It was also stated that Shaw's inclusion was more to fulfill Indiana Jones's typical intrepid female character, more than to open the door for a spin-off. However, for anyone who has seen The Dial of Destiny or seen a review of it, you will know that Helen Shaw has all the descriptions of annoying female characters in recent media. She's just good at everything, everybody seems to like her. It's the typical we need to beat the old guard down of the male action heroes to lift up these new women action heroes. It's a pattern that everyone is clearly seeing, and South Park is clearly riffing off that, and riffing off it very well.
This was fueled further after Kennedy received bigoted backlash from angry fans like Cartman, and she retaliated again with use of the Panda Stone in an endless bitter cycle.
Yes, again, it's a very good riff on reality. People are fed up with the way things are going. I mean, hell, I've just had the biggest channel growth I've had in about 3 years because I just complained about how Doctor Who is going through this panda stoning to the nth degree by essentially making it that trans people are gods that can completely overturn what was essentially Time Lord cancer. I mean, if you want a more detailed look at that, please do see my stream from the other day. But another problem with Doctor Who is that the people behind the scenes, especially Russell T Davies, the new showrunner, or old showrunner, since this is a comeback special, has just been quite open about the fact that he wants this all to be propaganda, and I have all the receipts you could possibly need for that to be the case. And it's really not difficult to find the same things with Disney. Why else would they be showing statistics of how they are having less and less and less white people and men in their ranks if their goal wasn't to minimise their impact within the company or just to get rid of them? And yes, the reaction from the fans is obviously, can you stop bothering with all this diversity nonsense, we just want good stories, which to be fair to them they still sometimes can come out with, such as Andor with Star Wars. The reaction is just as Russell T Davies did with Doctor Who, to basically tell people, tough, this is what we're doing now, we are just making propaganda and you have to suck it up. What do you expect fans' reaction to be when they are effectively told to go away in their opinion on things that they have loved since their childhood, are now effectively going to tell them that they hate them and want to brainwash them?
In the end, both sides apologise. Cartman is returned to his proper place, and all is right with the world once again.
I mean, that's just one possible ending to all this nonsense, but honestly, the only people I think really need to apologise are anyone who has actually sent harassing or threatening mail or emails or Twitter posts to the people making this sort of thing. I don't have anything to apologise for, and I'm probably in the realm of a Cartmanite in this episode. But there you go, plot summary of the A-plot of the Pandaverse episode. So now we can really get into Jack Saint's arguments. Take it away, sir.
So this is the first in a series of just short media takes on recent media controversies. And let me be clear that Matt Stone and Trey Parker are fascist eugenics propaganda agenda.
Now, let Jack Saint speak. I think this is a joke. I'm pretty sure this is a joke. I am praying that this is a joke. I get the feeling, though, that this will be one of those typical leftist things of, oh, hey, I'm joking when I call you a fascist, and then the whole subtext of the rest of the video is that, yeah, I wasn't really joking about that. It's the classic smug H-bomber guy style of saying that, oh, I'm just joking when I call this person a racist or a fascist, and then the rest of the video, it's just clearly sarcastic comments about how they really are fascist or whatever.
And here they are again, spreading their hate crime message with another episode of South Park attacking diversity in media.
Okay, it's at this point where it could go either way, I'm really not sure. But let's be fair here, diversity has absolutely been killing good storytelling for some years now. It was never really a question of if South Park were going to riff off diversity in media, it was more a question of when, and also how hard they go against it. And for anyone who's not watched the episode, it's pretty one-sided against Disney and diverse media. I genuinely think that there were some things they could have done in the episode to make fun of the people who were pushing against diversity, but they really don't go into much detail about it, and even have lines in it to imply that the reaction against it was fairly justified, to be honest with you.
I think everyone's been aware for a while now that the politics of South Park are brutally, painfully centrist, which also makes them far right, and don't make me point at the sign again. But
I'm not going to lie to you here, I don't know Jack Saint too well. I don't follow his stuff too well. However, when I saw that the title of the video was The End of Woke, and I saw Anita Sarkeesian and Gamergate in the thumbnail, I just had a feeling that he would be a leftist that knows absolutely nothing about the things he's talking about. The type of person that will tell you you need to do a course in media literacy and then give you the most media illiterate takes that you can possibly imagine. And apparently his political ones are worse. I don't know why people still use fishhook theory as a serious argument, since all that argument boils down to is that sometimes they agree with people I don't like, and therefore they're far right, because anyone I don't like is far right. That's literally all they can ever say. And really, so far, that's all Jack Saint has said here.
This time they went too far, using people of colour and marginalised female billionaire corporate executives to spread their message of hate, to use them as a punchline to condemn inclusion and frankly, being a decent f***ing human being.
See, it's at this point I really can't tell which way he's actually going with this. I'm finding it very hard to tell if this is pure sarcasm or if this is one of those post-sarcasm videos where we're a bit like H-Bomber Guy, who will be performatively sarcastic when talking about someone, and then at the end of the day, when he's asked to sincerely say what he thinks about said people, he will basically just say, oh yeah, no, I genuinely believed all that. The best example recently is with H-Bomber Guy talking about Internet Historian. I mean, he calls him a Nazi and fascist, an anti-Semite, at best, using idiots in his comment section and using he didn't particularly think that DashCon was a very good convention as evidence, and doubles down on it and doesn't do anything about his audience, going through his videos calling him a fascist or plagiarist, despite the fact that, I mean, the plagiarism thing was dealt with 6 months ago. But here with Jack Saint and South Park, I really can't tell if he genuinely thinks that Matt Stone and Trey Parker are fascists or centrists not knowing they're fascists, or if this is just all sarcasm. I mean, we really need to wait to the end to find out.
Walt Disney at it again.
Look, man, if you're going to parody someone, at least go full force into it. Actually put on a Scottish accent, and if you're actually going to try and parody him, try and at least copy his style. Because this really is just a half-baked joke. I mean, I get it, you're parodying Critical Drinker, but it's just a very, very half-baked delivery, and it's just not entertaining.
Nowadays, it seems like no matter what, the mainstream media can't stop pandering to the Twitter mob, being forced to spread the message out of fear of being executed by the
Thought police.
Okay, yeah, that's pretty close to Drinker's arguments. Let's see if he gives Drinker's analysis a fair shake. I don't have high hopes.
Since South Park was purchased by Disney, I've been worried that Trey Parker and Matt Stone would be another victims of the cucked beta generation of writers.
Now, I don't know if Jack Saint's just an idiot, or he's doing it partly for the bit, but as you can see, that article was written on April the 1st. It's an April Fool's article. So Disney does not own the South Park franchise, it is owned by Paramount. But I'm just very confused if Jack Saint actually thinks this and is unironically doing this straw man of Critical Drinker, or if he's going a bit meta and saying, oh, Critical Drinker would think that this is a serious article even though it was made on April the 1st. Either way, this is a really silly thing to put in the video.
Now, with their newest episode, it seems like Kathleen Kennedy has finally got her claws in.
Okay, yeah, it's the straw man version of Drinker that he's going for. That could have been very embarrassing for Jack Saint instead. He's embarrassing himself with a straw man instead.
Here we have another episode where Cartman is yet again depicted as an insecure straw man version of our genuine concerns about the corruption of beloved classic media, with a forced message about how internet racists are actually to blame for the problems with modern woke entertainment.
See, this is one of those videos I find quite amazing. The whole reason that this video is 30 minutes long is because there are these skits in them that aren't particularly funny and don't really evolve his point at all. I mean, I throw the odd joke into videos, but really, if say I'm doing a reaction video, I try and make each reaction bit actually get across a point or make a joke. If it's a joke, it's no more than 10 seconds. If it's something like this where I'm trying to expand on a point, I'm actually telling you something, giving you more information, and if anyone ever does react to my video, it gives you more to even react to. But when it comes to things like this, I've got nothing to say other than this is a really bad skit and straw man. Please get to your point.
To make things worse, Stan's dad is once again propped up as another incompetent white male who hates Kathleen Kennedy while not even knowing who she is.
So after this, I'm just going to skip any critical drinker skit bits that don't add anything. But I do want to point out that it is quite funny that out of all the visuals that you could have put up of this bit, you don't put up an actual bit of Randy Marsh being incompetent. You show him with, instead of just it being white males being competent, you actually have a black male in there as well. For those of you familiar with EFAP, this is Mauler's Law. What Jack Saint has done is, even though this is a straw man, he has put up a visual that has completely contradicted the straw man that he is making. Given this video is half an hour long, I wouldn't be shocked if there are more examples of Mauler's Law.
The whole thing presenting resistance to the woke menace is just a load of confused, emotionally volatile men spending our time arguing about made-up problems with children's franchises and projecting all our real-world issues onto it.
I mean, we'll address the straw man argument, I guess, because yes, he calls Nerdrotic the volatile young man, or just man, whatever, but, if you're going to be parodying Critical Drinker, why wouldn't you use Critical Drinker's work as your example here? I mean, don't get me wrong, they're certainly in the same circle and talk to each other a lot, and happen to agree on the problems, but you got to come around to the realisation that these channels are absolutely huge. Critical Drinkers are nearly at 2 million subscribers, Nerdrotic nearly at 1 million, and their videos get huge engagement because of varying themes of the writing in the modern day media is god-awful, and yes, they are trying to push the message, as Critical Drinker puts it, and that's become such a meme that it was even mentioned in BBC articles about Doctor Who, in a supportive way to the message is all that this show is about. The message is what is being pushed, and that is all that matters, and that is a bad thing. So you can try and dismiss these criticisms all you want, but the fact of the matter is that the reason these YouTubers can make money off pointing out these problems is because they resonate with people.
This is just like when they turned Mario into a goofy punching bag and Ken into an irrelevant simp, rather than the masculine icon of our youth.
I mean, I agree with Mario, people were giving that a false positive in terms of wokeness, but from the many reviews I've heard of Barbie, that was an absolutely feminist film, where the happy ending is the Barbies returning to Barbie World and keeping the Kens under the Barbie dictatorship, so if that's not a feminist film, I don't know what is. Anyway, this is how Jack Saint ends this skit. He just admits that he made a straw man of Critical Drinker, which I suppose at least he was man enough to admit that, but I get the feeling when he made this video, he only watched the Critical Drinkers review after he made the skit, and then decided, oh, this is obviously going to be a straw man if anyone checks both, I'll put this in to make me not seem like a total idiot. So I suppose we've got to give him credit there, but just take the whole skit out. It wasn't very good, and it didn't really make any points or expand on any points you've already made.
See, I don't really like being online anymore.
I'd actually love to know why, because the internet seems to just get more and more sanitised over time. Okay, we had Elon Musk taking over Twitter and unbanning a load of people, but from what I can tell, that's really not changed Twitter all that much, really. There are just big accounts there that weren't before, but there were still people making very similar points.
I remember first getting unmonitored access to dial-up internet at my grandparents' house when I was maybe 8 years old. Then, as I got older, I discovered forums, and on those forums were many people, usually ranging between the ages of 11 and 30, just arguing.
Okay, yes, but before the internet you would have film clubs. Before the internet you would have places where you would probably be finding similar conversations. I mean, don't get me wrong, the internet has been very good for connecting people up, but to make it out like arguing about media only came about post-internet is a bit ridiculous.
Often about things that were barely related to the thing the forum was actually made to discuss. For me, that was usually games or cartoons and webcomics, which were again the thing I went online for.
I mean, that's fine, yeah, just stick to the forums that are about gaming and things like that. I mean, to be fair, Is Warrior a Libertarian is technically still about games, but I can understand what you mean. You want conversations that are a little bit less memey.
Somewhere along the way, talking about games and TV shows required me to form political opinions.
Why? This channel has come about completely separate from media. I made my first media video specifically about fiction about 6 months into starting YouTube, and that was just to cover E3 at the time. And then a video later, I cover some themes in The Simpsons, but I wouldn't even call that video political. More a video about how a particular Simpsons episode reflected human nature. Most of these people who are talking about politics in media, they want to get to a position where there are less people like you, Jack. Less people who feel like they have to get political because of media.
And I think this is where it all went wrong for me.
Well, if it's ended up with you in this position, yes, I would probably agree with that.
In 2012, a feminist media critic made a fundraiser for a documentary series about sexist cliches in video games.
Yep, no, you getting political was definitely a mistake. Anita Sarkeesian was a huge mistake, and anyone who asks for tens of thousands of dollars to set up a Discord is a grifter. It doesn't matter how honest they look in everything else they do. You cannot be that dishonest about the cost to set up a Discord server and be 100% honest in everything else you do. It's simply not possible.
And then everything went bad.
I mean, in the gaming industry, yeah, there's plenty of evidence for that. We literally had Battlefield 5 developers telling people not to buy their game if they weren't happy with the fact that they completely rewrote a historic story about a Norwegian Special Forces team made up entirely of men and changed those 15 men into one woman, along with the fact that their trailer had a steampunk woman on the front lines of World War II. It just kind of ruins the whole aesthetic that people were hoping for, similar to that of Battlefield 1. This definitely has to do with the infestation of wokeness, if you want to call it that, or intersectionality or whatever, into the video game industry, and Anita Sarkeesian was certainly a vanguard for that.
Here's a fancy word: narrativizing. The communication of ideas and information as a narrative.
I don't know why leftist YouTubers do this all the time. They'll pick up a fancy word, tell you what it means, and then latch onto it as if they think it makes them smarter in any way. People know what narrativizing is because people know what a narrative is, and if you add eyes to the end of a word, you are then in the process of doing that thing. So it's even worse in this case for Jack Saint because he's chosen a word that pretty much everyone knows what it means, and then told you what it means. It's very patronising.
It's something I think about a lot as a YouTube video explainy person, because a big part of explaining complex social or political issues is giving it a clear structure, a beginning and a conclusion.
Look, pretty much every single video I've made apart from 2 have been completely unscripted, and people don't particularly say that my videos are unstructured, so this isn't a particularly difficult thing to do. But I would just love to know where you're going with this.
To help you avoid going off on weird abstract tangents like I'm doing right now.
Look, I'm not one for saying, oh my god, why is this video so long? You've made your video too long. But when the video is 30 minutes long and I'm already about 5 minutes through and I still can't really tell you what the point of your video is, then you've run into a massive problem. And you have obviously scripted this. I don't understand how you have scripted this and made it so confusing as to what you are getting at here.
You may have heard, especially if you followed the channel for a while, that there has been a crisis of media wokeness.
Power-hungry, destructive feminism type of that.
Stupid wokeness.
Yes, that's exactly what the South Park episode was getting at. They just didn't use the word woke. Because, and yes, I do agree that it is a problem with the word woke, it has about 20 different definitions, and every time someone says it, you need to first understand what version of woke they mean.
The way this crisis is often narrativized.
Oh, look, as I said before, the word narrativized, it's not this big-brained, only academics use this type of word. Everyone already knew what it meant, but you put the definition up, and now for some reason you are putting it up again on screen. What is wrong with you? Do you think your audience is full of children? Why would you assume that? I don't assume that. Critical Drinker doesn't assume that. Why do you?
It's to treat it like a recent phenomenon.
Okay, please let me know what you mean by this is not a recent phenomenon. Because pandering to leftists to the level that we have seen recently absolutely is. There's just no doubt about it.
My experience of being dragged into the world of political games and shows and movies is probably relatable to a fair chunk of people around my age, but it isn't actually true that this suddenly popped up in the mid to late 2000s.
Oh my god, get to your point. You need to tell me what you think isn't new, and you also need to tell me how you got political with games and media, because I certainly didn't. It happened to me through environmental issues and doing geology at university, because I realised most environmentalists lie about the issues.
It's not even the first label this specific pop culture hysteria has gone by. It used to be called political correctness.
Okay, yeah, true, that's been a thing for quite a while. It's actually a term that comes from Nazi Germany of all places. And all it was really a euphemism for was following the party line. That's all political correctness meant originally. They really became popularised in the West after Mao's Little Red Book, and political correctness just meant holding the party line to do with Mao's Little Red Book and his policies in that. And therefore, political correctness then just meant a euphemism for agreeing with the far left. And obviously, the term for what is politically correct became a euphemism for just agreeing with the far left. Yes, you are correct. This isn't the first time we have seen wokeness, but this is the first time we have seen political correctness or wokeness on this scale before.
A term that existed for about a century and people only stopped using when it became simply too cringe to say.
Yes, again, partially due to South Park. Big thanks to PC Principal on that front. So all they're doing here is pointing out the same problem but within Disney rather than within academia. Because that's what PC Principal was. He was a man who came straight from academia to become the politically correct principal.
For as long as pop culture has existed, there has been a political context it has existed in and which has been argued about. In the first story he ever appeared in, Captain America punched Hitler.
Yes, I can't believe a comic book with a superhero had the comic hero called Captain America, who was a World War II soldier, punch Hitler. But I agree this is something not communicated particularly well by people who say, I want media to be less political. They don't mean they want media to be less political. They mean they want it to be less monopolitical, in that the media is created with more than just woke leftists in mind. Because I think even Jack Saint here would struggle to point to a film that is a masterpiece and is also described as woke by even people on his side. Although they obviously wouldn't use the term woke, they'd use the term progressive. But if you're conflating Captain America punching Hitler in the 1940s as politically correct, then I don't know what to tell you. If that's what you think the standard is for politics in media, then yeah, this is why people on your side get bullied about this.
Star Wars was explicitly based on the Vietnam War from the Vietnamese perspective.
Specifically the Viet Cong perspective. You got to bear in mind there were, quite a lot of Vietnamese fighting in the South Vietnam side. But to be honest, the interview doesn't do a great job at saying that it is pro-Viet Cong propaganda.
Good guys are the rebels. They're using asymmetric warfare against a highly organized empire. I think we call those guys terrorists.
I did it. They were Viet Cong.
So were you thinking of that at the time?
Yes. That was the whole point.
Yeah, so the way Jack Saint has put this clip together, it makes it sound like that the whole point was that the rebels were the Viet Cong and they represent, therefore, everything that Viet Cong represent, when in reality, this is what George Lucas said.
Or a fantasy.
Or a colonial, we're fighting the largest empire in the world.
Right.
And we're just a bunch of hayseeds in coonskin hats that don't know nothing.
That's right.
And it was the same thing with the Vietnamese.
Yep.
And the big, highly technical empire.
The English Empire, right?
The English Empire, the American Empire, lost.
Yeah.
That was the whole point.
So, just to make that very clear, the politics of the Viet Cong, the politics of any small rebel group is completely irrelevant to what Star Wars was all about. Star Wars wasn't about the specific politics of the Empire or the rebels. The whole point was the story of how you can actually beat the big gluttonous Empire as a small guerrilla faction. That's all it was about. It doesn't matter that it happened to be the Viet Cong who embodied this at the time, because as George Lucas says, that detail doesn't matter, because he also references the American revolutionaries in the 1770s against the British Empire. And the Viet Cong versus the American revolutionaries, those are two completely different types of politics.
Even now, there are people arguing that RoboCop was somehow apolitical fun that only now people are trying to insert political issues into.
I mean, to be fair, you did just try and do that with Star Wars. You tried to say that the rebels are the Viet Cong, and yes, the rebels are the Viet Cong, but they're not the Viet Cong because they're communists. They are the Viet Cong because the Viet Cong happened to be the small guerrilla faction versus the American Empire.
We're critiquing social mores of the time, particularly the Reagan era.
If you know anything about the 80s and Ronald Reagan, everything was privatized. The climate was ripe, I think. The country was ready.
We wanted to have fun with this whole thing, so we named all the cops after mass murderers.
This is why I say these people don't understand politics or what they're talking about. Assuming this Kotaku in Action article is accurate, and the article was complaining that RoboCop isn't an ACAB simulator. The clips you've just shown from the RoboCop documentary are criticising specifically capitalism and mass privatisation, which is completely different to saying ACAB, or all cops are bad people, and turning it into a cop-killing simulator, essentially. You should be able to tell that these are two different critiques, but for some reason you seem to think that if you're anti-capitalist, you must therefore think all cops are bad. Well, that's actually what this, or at least this summary of what the article says, is saying. No one in this Kotaku in Action article is saying that RoboCop didn't have political themes or messaging in it. They are saying you're an idiot if you took away from that it was anti-cop, because absolutely no one in that documentary, or the clips you showed of it, was saying cops are bad.
We didn't start the fire. It was always burning, since the world's been turning. Just like all those books that got ritually burned by anti-communists because they were worried it was infecting people with leftist ideology.
I mean, yeah, the point in the Billy Joel song "We Didn't Start the Fire" is to point out that crazy things are happening in the world all the time, and just because you're 18 to 20 years old doesn't mean that you're living in the craziest time, sure. I don't know why you then led into communist book burnings, because I have literally no idea what this has to do with the rest of the video. Again, this is another classic leftist video of, I don't know what your point is. Your point of, there has always been leftist messaging in media. No one has said there hasn't been. The whole point, if you would bother to listen to people like Critical Drinker, is that it seems to be in every mainstream movie now, and it is destroying every franchise. Now that is a new phenomenon.
Again, this is hard to narrativize. There isn't a clear beginning, and there definitely is not a conclusion in sight.
I mean, at least he didn't put the word on the screen this time. But just because people can't give you an exact date and time doesn't mean that there was no start to this. Anita Sarkeesian seems to be a good starting point where people are noticing this is where it becomes explicit. That's not people saying this didn't happen before. However, it is people saying, like me, that it got a lot more explicit and seemed to affect more and more franchises and pieces of media post Anita Sarkeesian effectively getting what she wants. And that's just in the gaming space. In the film and television space, people were noticing things were getting a lot more woke or intersectional from probably before Anita Sarkeesian, but we are constantly able to add to the list of franchises that have been infected by wokeism. You name a famous franchise from the 80s, it's probably been affected by it. The only one that hasn't, probably, is Transformers, but that's just become bad because Michael Bay keeps making those awful films. Now, that's not to do necessarily with wokeism, that's to do with bad writing. But that is an issue that coincides with the issue of wokeness in media, because Michael Bay keeps hiring writers that keep making successful films because people simply like Transformers with explosions, and Disney and other media conglomerates keep hiring really bad writers because, as Critical Drinker constantly says, they are pushing the message and they are rewarded for doing that rather than giving them good results.
And this has been one of the things I've tried to argue against with a lot of what I do, because whenever I see people arguing nostalgically about the way things used to be, I can't help but see it as so painfully short-sighted and naive.
I mean, even if Jack Saint is correct and absolutely everything from the 80s was woke as well, then what do you think is going to happen? Do you think they're going to accept wokeism or the ideology then? Or do you think it's much more likely they will say, oh, well, in that case, all of that is bad as well? Because there are themes on abortion in the Alien franchise, but it's so subtle that no one even cares, and it's only about one particular part of the film. The rest of the film is all about surviving, and how far people will go to survive and save others. And that's much more interesting and universalist than Rey turned into a Skywalker and killed the Emperor because she's a woman. Like, you've got to be able to see the difference here, surely.
Pop culture didn't become politically charged in this way. We didn't just now start arguing about social justice ideology being reflected in media. You just started to notice all this either because of age or some inciting incident.
Well, given it's people of all ages complaining about this, it's clearly not an age thing or a maturity thing. So maybe you're correct in the inciting incident, so why don't you expand on that? But I do love how he's got this particular picture as an example of effectively saying, oh, these people are just pathetic because, oh, there are trans pride flags in Call of Duty. Now, the thing with this is that there have been trans flags in Call of Duty since Modern Warfare 2019. And in Modern Warfare 2019, you had a whole load of calling cards, which is what these are, and the pride ones came in halfway through the game's life cycle, something like that, about 6 months after release. The thing is, with Modern Warfare 2 and Modern Warfare 3, the two sequel games that I've played of Call of Duty, they have had these flags in the beta with basically no other calling cards. They are the first thing they add to the game. They don't even add the country flags to them. And people just start noticing this pattern. This woke stuff is all put in there first before anything else. And people probably do want this sort of thing in because I see people using them. If they're ironic or not, I have no idea. But they are still a minority of the calling cards used. People would obviously, as they reveal, rather have either their own country flags or other piece of artwork in their calling card. But these are the ones that are put in first. And yes, people are tired of seeing it first and foremost. It's front and centre. Now, does that mean Call of Duty is woke? No. I think Call of Duty is just corporatist, and they do have a lesbian CIA agent as one of their main characters. But the thing is that this isn't a problem. She is her own character. She adds to the story. There's way more to say about her than just she is a woman and she is a lesbian. And that is what people would want to see. But the problem is, as South Park keeps pointing out and you keep not addressing, it's that none of that matters because they can keep putting black women who are gay in these shows and say that's enough for marketing, this should be good enough for general audiences. And all the reaction is just saying, no, we're fed up of this, please write something good. And then eventually you do end up getting your Last of Us or your Andor, but unfortunately, as mentioned before, especially when it comes to Star Wars, a lot of the merchandise whales out there are effectively just overgrown children who want to see more of their key jangling, their Thrawns, their Millennium Falcons, things like that.
And now, like that word you'd never heard before, you can see it everywhere. And if a lot of that exact same media you love was now coming out, you would be arguing it was an insidious form of wokeness gone mad.
Well, it depends on the context of it, yeah. They may have let the cat out of the bag. I've recently been rewatching some older Doctor Who's, and they are incredibly subtle with some of the messages they put in. I mean, just take a look at this one.
Not exactly white, in case you haven't noticed.
Besides, you'd be surprised. Elizabethan England, not so different from your time.
Yes, that is a very subtle way of saying that seeing black people would have been a completely ordinary thing in Tudor England, when the whole point of Henry VIII having a single black trumpeter is that will have been seen as exotic and unusual. So, yes, quite an early stage of subtle woke ideology there, but no one paid mind because it was literally half a second. Most people wouldn't notice, and the rest of the episode has nothing to do with it. However, because it's everywhere now and because the cat's out of the bag, you do tend to notice these things more now when you go back. Is this a problem? It depends how much it affects the writing. Because in modern day Doctor Who, you have the Doctor literally saying that Jesus was black and history was a whitewash. Not as subtle and completely takes you out of the story. The David Tennant bit didn't, the Christopher Capaldi bit does.
In most of the important ways, nothing has actually changed.
As these people keep saying though, and you keep ignoring, it has though. The quality of the media being created doesn't matter anymore. What matters is it pushing the correct agenda now? Star Trek, I've never seen it, but I imagine they always put story first. Same with a lot of media from the 80s. And that's people's problem today. The story and writing is being completely undermined, or isn't even being bothered to be redrafted, because the message is in there and that seems to be given the okay from producers. That's what people's problem is. I don't think there is anyone out there in the media sphere you're talking about with Critical Drinker, Nerdrotic, Mauler and all that, who would say a woke piece of media was bad if it was written well. They care about the writing. I'm the one that cares more about the politics and propaganda, because a lot of the time it is effectively a denial of reality, especially when it comes to race bending in history. I mean, while we're on the topic of Doctor Who, people are fed up with it for things like this. This is supposed to be Isaac Newton. Why is he half Indian, when Isaac Newton was one of the whitest people in history? I would love to hear reasoning from you, Jack Saint. I would love to hear reasoning from you that isn't just an intersectional argument. And while you're giving me the explanation, can you please let me know when in the 80s they made historical fiction where they race bent to this degree, or even gender bent to this degree? Because typically it didn't really happen, because people would go, why have you made this historical English figure Indian? That's completely stupid.
Now, at the time tropes versus women in video games came out, I was just starting out university. And I do think, like a lot of things, this process of discussions getting more overtly political was quite gradual.
Why, Jack? Why do you think there was a gradual increase of it? Do you think it could possibly be because media was more worried about writing, and we're on video games at this point, game mechanics first, and thought about how they could put messaging in second, or in some cases probably didn't even think about that. But over time it became more and more overt that gameplay and story came second to putting these pieces of propaganda in. Do you think it could be anything to do with that? Do you think Critical Drinker and that lot might have some sort of point somewhere in what they're saying?
There was a specific moment where suddenly it felt like there was a lot more threads. There weren't so much, did you like this game mechanic, and became, should female characters be modelled in a way that communicates something about them other than fan service?
So the story behind this was that one woman complained about Tracer being too sexualised on the right there, and so the creative director of Overwatch came out and said, we want everyone to enjoy this game and therefore we will remove that pose and replace it with the one on the left. I wouldn't be shocked if these forum posts were actually complaining about the fact that a few busybodies can change a pose that a lot of the fan base liked, and it did just show them the direction things were going. Less fan service to the fans, more service to those who are on board with feminism, which isn't a majority of people.
Again, nowhere near the beginning of those conversations. There's always been discussions about the ways that games very specifically pandered to an audience of horny teenage boys.
Yes, and no one particularly cared because gaming has always been a more male-orientated medium. Yes, there are games for girls out there, that's perfectly fine, and there are even girls that like playing Batman Arkham Knight, and even like playing Catwoman in it, even though she is overly sexualised. And nobody is saying that this all started with Anissa Sarkeesian. They are just saying this is where it seemed to get a lot less subtle, and people started noticing where it was infesting.
It would be silly to say that Anita Sarkeesian came along, and then all of a sudden this just sprouted out of nowhere.
Well, it's a good thing absolutely nobody said that then, isn't it?
But I was also, you know, on the ground when all this was happening. And with the release of that show and the arguments surrounding it, I definitely noticed a kind of tide shift. Definitely a whole new wave of people suddenly joined into that discussion. And
again, Jack, you got to ask yourself, why do you think that is? You keep saying it. This didn't start with Anita Sarkeesian, right? Okay, but you've also just said that with Anita Sarkeesian, a lot of people started joining into the conversation, and there was even a tidal shift, as you say, in the conversation. So I don't know why, if you've noticed there was a tidal shift, and all these people are out here saying, yeah, it was around the time Anita Sarkeesian and I started noticing all this, you've got to realise that, yeah, she wasn't the first person saying this. That's fine. No one is arguing that. She was the vanguard for this type of thing, though. It was probably all subtly in the background, and people weren't getting higher up and being consultants for the gaming industry and things like that, like Anita Sarkeesian was, despite the fact she's barely actually played any games. But you have no introspection. You can't, for some reason, look at what Critical Drinker and Nerdrotic and Mauler are saying and say, oh, maybe they have a point. For some reason you have to say, because this didn't start with Anita Sarkeesian, they must be wrong, but you've just admitted that they were right, essentially.
Let me talk about South Park again for a bit.
I keep forgetting that this was the point of the video. I keep forgetting that this all started off with South Park completely destroying pandering media. Just to go over what Jack Saint's points have been so far, there are people on the centre and the right wing who complain about modern media because it's too politically correct or woke. There have been progressive themes in TV and media throughout history, therefore what they are complaining about is a complete non-issue. He has spent 12 minutes trying to say that while being funny in between. And his references to say that old media is woke aren't even good references. His own clips don't prove his point. And we're not even halfway through the video here, by the way. I just skipped a whole advert. Realistically, we've actually only got through 10 minutes of video, and he has said basically nothing.
And I didn't really hate the message, even if I do have some strong criticisms of it.
Alright, cool, come on, get on with it.
On a personal level, I thought the special was pretty entertaining, especially as someone who hasn't really checked in with South Park for a while, but used to watch it quite a lot.
Right, cool. Why have you made this video? From the two things you have just said there, you just agree with the Critical Drinker and Nerdrotic. What are you trying to say here?
Now, when the special came out, there was a big surge in people declaring that this was an epic takedown of woke leftist ideology, and a clear sign that Matt Stone and Trey Parker were signaling their support of the real cinema fans against this onslaught by stuff like woke Star Wars.
I mean, how was it not? They obviously planted their flag against the pandering media, against the idea of just putting a chick in things, making them gay and lame, and that being as far as the marketing goes. Are you gonna tell me that instead they think this is all good? Like, what are you saying?
Followed by a counterwave of critics insisting the episode was the opposite, a mockery of the endless whining about diversity from certain chunks of popular media fandoms.
Yes, there were some things in that episode that were a bit critical of the type of people that are pushing back against this stuff. That doesn't mean that they think the stuff's good. That means they probably think the people complaining about this woke stuff could probably do it better.
I don't think either of those are fully true, which I think makes this the first time I have the same opinion on something as the critical drinker.
What? Are you saying the critical drinker is a man of nuance now? I'm confused. Because I do agree. I think the Pandaverse could have been more harsh about the way Disney has been handling its creation of media. But why would you then have that whole skit at the beginning where you are making fun of the critical drinker for not being nuanced? I'm so confused. Like, the whole skit at the beginning says critical drinker is not nuanced, and then he's had 2 separate moments now where he's admitted that the critical drinker is nuanced. I'm really confused why you'd make fun of him then for not being a nuanced person.
There's a tendency for people to try and conflate art that they enjoy with art that explicitly agrees with their perspective.
Right, not too sure where you're going with this.
Not just in a creative, theoretical way, but like, this is the creator specifically signalling to me.
I mean, as I went through with Doctor Who recently, that is entirely why people, especially in the Guardian comment sections, were saying they enjoyed Doctor Who. It's because it signalled that trans people were effectively superhuman, and they were all saying, oh, my non-binary daughter was absolutely loving this. And, oh, this made my trans kids feel really comfortable. Nothing about the actual story completely destroying one of the greatest bittersweet emotional payoffs Doctor Who has ever created. Honestly, go watch my review stream. It was a show that had about 5 out of 10 ideas with a 1 out of 10 execution, with some decent moments sprinkled within it.
In a way that leads to them often ignoring things that might contradict that, which I think is kind of what happened to South Park here.
Okay, finally, an interesting take. Let's see where he goes with it.
Cartman is very often the butt of the joke in South Park, which is something some fans do seem to weirdly miss at times. When Cartman makes fun of Jews, the joke is on Cartman being an immature edgelord.
I think people do realise that, but Cartman's a little bit more than just the person who is evil 100% of the time. For example, in Cartoon Wars, where Cartman was trying to shut down Family Guy, he is the voice of animators in that episode. You know, King of the Hill sent the South Park creators flowers and chocolates because they loved the fact that they were criticising Family Guy's writing throughout those 3 episodes. And the entirety of the criticism of Family Guy was told directly through Cartman. So it's not that Cartman's opinions are all evil all of the time. It's more that Cartman's character is an outspoken brat who is evil a lot of the time, but can be right in some cases.
And it's not like Cartman is never portrayed as being basically in the right, even if it's usually more in a expressing the thing you think but would never actually do kind of way.
Oh, so Jack Saint just admits that anyway. Yes, this was one of those episodes, one of the episodes where everyone is thinking this and Cartman is the one saying it. So again, what is your point here?
In this case, I think you have to see the setup of the special as it is. A child having nightmares and sending out thousands of hate mail letters because he's terrified of a Disney executive and black women.
I mean, it's not that they're being replaced by black women per se. The black women part is neither here nor there. That's just because of that's what's happening in current day. His fear is that his friends were being replaced with people he doesn't recognise. That was his fear. That was the point of all his nightmares, and the point was that it was Kathleen Kennedy because she was going in this negative feedback loop where she kept seeing these abusive pieces of fan mail and going, well, if these terrible people are saying this, I must be doing the right thing, and it turned out not to be the right thing.
Living in constant fear that children's characters he loves will eventually be made diverse.
Yes, again, people are getting fed up of this. This is why people like Cartman in this episode.
The point seems clear that the kinds of people who obsess over media wokeness day in day out are both overinflating the severity of the issue and, with the Kathleen Kennedy part of the episode, maybe even inadvertently fueling pushback by being the worst examples of their own cause.
I can agree with that. There are certainly a lot of false positives when it comes to calling things woke. Mario was the example used in this film, and I've seen it plenty of times. There are plenty of examples of reviewers, whether it be YouTubers or article writers, writing that effectively just having someone that isn't a straight white male be in a film does make it woke in some way, and that's not what it means. You specifically have to be pushing the intersectional ideology for it to be woke, whether that's feminism, critical race theory, something like that. And an example off the top of my head is that with Scream 5, the only people who were murdered and who died were white people, and everyone who either survived or was stabbed and survived was diverse in some way or another, whether they were gay, black, Middle Eastern, something like that. Which, even if that was true, that would be a false positive, because the film isn't trying to push any sort of woke narrative. In fact, it's a film that is trying to criticise people reacting in an overboard way about really bad remakes and reboots. But anyway, white people survive in that film, so I don't know why people were calling it woke. It really is a buzzword in some ways, and it's why I'm on the fence about using it, but that's why I make it clear when I say woke, I mean intersectional.
Where I think the special misses the mark, though, is in this conclusion. In the words of South Park Kathleen,
I wouldn't have tried to fight racism with a Panderstone if you hadn't written all those letters.
I mean, I think it misses the mark in a way, because I really don't think Disney executives really care that much about people complaining about wokeness. I think they care a hell of a lot more about the fact that they are losing money. I don't know how much this double down is to do with the reaction from people on YouTube, and more just to do with the fact that the incentives to get higher status is to keep pandering like this, because it makes a lot of the rich Hollywood types feel better about themselves. It honestly could just come down to that.
Now, South Park has been criticised plenty in the past for being very both-sidesy in how it engages with politics, taking the giant douche versus turd sandwich metaphor and often applying it to two absurd caricatures of any particular position, even if one requires a lot more stretching than the other.
I'm not going to lie, I've recently watched all the South Parks recently. I can't off the top of my head think of an episode where they do this and one side does take more stretching than the other. They seem to just reflect a caricature of both sides, and I don't think they ever really stretch it too much. But Jack Saint's clearly a leftist, so obviously he thinks typically the right wing you'd have to stretch a bit more than the left wing.
Most famous now is the Man Bear Pig episode that presented environmentalist Al Gore as an absurd alarmist over a fictional monster. In fairness, this was then addressed in a later season, but it still reflects a general trend in the show's ideology.
Oh man, again, if you're trying to find the ideology of South Park, you're just not going to find it. Because what Matt and Trey especially tried to do in later episodes was just reflect what they are seeing in the current zeitgeist, and then reflect these sides in their characters. If you want to go more right-wing, you would probably see that come out in someone like Cartman or Butter's parents. If you want to see a more left-wing perspective, you'll get that from Kyle or Stan's dad, Randy. And at no point do they really say this side is better than the other or anything like that. Although in early episodes they certainly are climate change deniers, I think we can say that. But then in later episodes, obviously rescind that position and say, okay, maybe the environmentalists do have a point to some degree, but they don't particularly say that the world is ending, so they're not quite that crazy.
I did want to quickly address a common way people refute this by claiming that South Park isn't promoting political apathy because they rarely attack people for caring about issues so much as performatively caring about an issue.
I mean, they certainly do criticise that. They certainly criticise political grifting and virtue signalling, and those are two perfectly fair things to criticise. I don't know what your issue is.
And I really can't overstate how much attacking people often baselessly for virtue signalling or accusing them of only pretending to care is just the politically apathetic way of attacking people for caring about an issue.
Oh, I see. He has a problem because he is a virtue signaller. If the only way you are going to be engaging with an issue is to say, please vote for my side, and then not do much else than that, then as far as I'm concerned, yeah, you really aren't serious about the issue. The only time I can see people being serious about the issues that they put forward are when they actually do something about it. Great example is me. I did a charity live stream a couple of years ago for Lads Need Dads, because one thing that I am constantly saying I'm worried about is fatherlessness in young boys. So I did something about it. It's probably way more than people do when they complain about homelessness or the capitalist system. You will not see many people flying over to Venezuela, given that that was constantly said to be a socialist paradise.
It is, after all, still the main way people tend to attack environmentalists. Please don't make me post the Matt Bores comic.
Well, thank God you didn't, because it is one of the most stupid comics I think I've ever seen in my life. Because the implication is that there isn't a lot people can do to leave the society that they are in, or find a better one, or improve society themselves. You actually have multiple avenues where you can do that, even if you don't think you have the capital to do it. Just improving your life bit by bit will have helped. I mean, he put up a graphic about Starbucks drinking millennials before. They are perfectly happy going on about stolen wages and things like that, when in reality most of their technology and clothing probably comes from places where they effectively have serf labour, such as, China and other places with sweatshops. And they actually do have the means to improve society by making different consumer decisions and by being more environmentally friendly. I mean, there are plenty of articles coming out now showing that the youngest generation, Gen Z, which is the most concerned about climate change, also does the least to actually improve the situation. They recycle the least, they drive the most, and they're the least likely to help out with their local environment by litter picking or something like that. So you can put the comic up all you want, but the fact of the matter is that it's a stupid comic, because the implication that people don't have the ability to improve the society they're in, just complain about it, is beyond stupid.
My perspective isn't that the episode's bad because it tries to present two sides as equally good, when I'm more inclined to the woke side or whatever.
I mean, I can give you the benefit of the doubt on that, but at the end of the day, in reality, you've said absolutely nothing on this topic at all. We're almost 20 minutes through the video and you've made a point you could have made in 20 seconds, with another minute to present your evidence and your explanation. You've said nothing.
What I did feel was that the episode was indicating in that direction, and then it just sort of missed the mark.
Yes, you said that before. Please explain what you mean.
The idea that pro or anti-diversity arguments are just kind of these two sides bickering with each other, fueling each other through sheer spite, is definitely like a neat bow that you could tie around these disagreements.
I mean, yes, I do disagree that these two things are fueling each other. I think the pro-diversity side or the woke side is certainly fueling a YouTube sphere that's, because diversity is just getting more and more and more overt and it's causing the writing to be less and less of a good quality, you are getting a circle in YouTube of people coming together where everyone admits that the writing's awful, and then the reasoning behind why that writing's getting awful and worse is due to different reasons. There are some people that purely put it down to the woke side. There are people who put it down to pure laziness. There's all these different things it could be, and generally everyone agrees with that a lot of the marketing is pushing the diverse pandering, and you can actually see this within the films as well. And also everyone agrees that there is poor writing. Now, where everyone is on those two sides of the argument, it depends. But it's also obviously fueling the extreme of both sides. People saying it's the worst writing they've ever seen, well, to be fair, they are more correct. And the people saying that it's all down to the wokery and saying that absolutely everything's woke when it's not. And that's fine. I'd say that's true, but I think South Park are wrong in thinking that Disney really care about their harassment or hate fan mail or anything like that. I don't think they're incentivized to keep pushing the pandering because of this, if there is any, harassment or criticism that they are getting. However, South Park were correct to have Cartman say, well, maybe just saying everything's woke is a bad idea, because it absolutely is. Not everything is woke, sometimes it is just really bad writing.
But I don't actually think that the trend towards diversity and inclusion in big corporate media is the result of top-level executives trying to fight racism with the trolls.
Okay, well there you go. I agree with Jack there. It's a shame it took him 20 minutes for him to actually properly address what he titled the video and what he said the video was about.
Stone. What if there was more to the Panda Stone? I mean, what does it represent? If you don't think about it too much, it seems pretty specific and coherent, but doesn't it seem like there's a little bit more going on here that we're not really talking about?
I mean, my interpretation of what the Panda Stone is intersectional ideology. It's the easy answers to make yourself feel better. I mean, I think the point of the hate fan mail was to get Kathleen Kennedy to think, oh, this is my incentive to fight racism or things like that. And so she thought, oh, I'll use the Panda Stone, which will then help me write more and more media, films, TV shows that create propaganda to fight these types of mindsets. That's what they were trying to go with. But I would love to know what Jack Saint thinks.
To sum up everything Gamergate was about is a difficult subject, but as the slogan went, it's about ethics in games journalism.
Why have you brought up Gamergate? This better be going somewhere with the Panda Stone, I swear to God.
And I would say for most supporters of the movement, they would express it in this two-pronged way. Firstly, there was fear about the intermingling of games development with games journalism, even if it may have started off with an accusation about a game developer sleeping with a journalist for a good review, when it turned out that review did not actually exist.
Yes, Gamergate all came down to one forum, talk about the drama of one blog post about one game developer who happened to be a woman sleeping with a games journalist, and the jealous boyfriend wrote a blog post accusing her of sleeping with people for good reviews, and it turned out that wasn't true. As a result of that, for some reason, absolutely every gaming journalist magazine online decided to write that all gamers are sexist because of this one blog post and this one forum. That was obvious collusion. That it was the main reason people said there was collusion between game developers and game journalists. And yes, I'm sure there was harassment going on at the time, but honestly, just search up PSA Sitch's Gamergate video because that just explains it all. If you think it was a harassment campaign, you have no idea what you're talking about.
Now, corporations trying to control the opinions expressed by review sites was already a well-known issue. It's actually the reason Giant Bomb existed, but this was not the focus of Gamergate's concern. Their concern was that the conversation around games was becoming biased by a kind of journalist ruling class of feminists and social justice warriors that was not representative of the gaming public at large.
I mean, yeah, that was the problem. Do you not think it's a problem that an elite group is completely trying to oppress the wants of a fan base that don't have as much power as them? Is that not somewhere in Marxist doctrine?
This was the second part of the issue, that even detached from any accusations about game makers and reviewers secretly collaborating, there was still going to be a shared bias or preference that was going to impact both games in general and how they were evaluated.
I mean, there was a bit more to it than the bias. People were pretty clear that IGN were being paid to write good reviews, and it turned out that was true. So it wasn't just the ideological bent of it, it's just the ideological bent of it became really huge and obvious when Anita Sarkeesian came out and tried to feminize the absolute pants off the industry, and then that became an even bigger drama when obviously Carl Benjamin was at VidCon, sat in the audience, and he was just berated by Anita Sarkeesian for just sitting there menacingly. PSA Stitch also has a good video explaining that whole drama. Subscribe to PSA Stitch, he's pretty good.
Separate this because when you really think about it, this is actually a very different and much more convoluted thing to sort out than just some sort of underhanded promotion going on.
I mean, I'll be honest with you, Jack Saint is probably one of the most nuanced leftists I've ever encountered in reaction videos here. Yes, Gamergate was complicated. Yes, Gamergate was about a couple of things at once. Nice one, well done. I don't understand then why you are not being nuanced yourself when it comes to, I mean, people that have come about as a development of Gamergate where it's gone outside of the gaming industry and into the film and television industry.
Not underhanded or even necessarily wrong to have a media perspective that doesn't necessarily align with a certain chunk of the gaming audience.
Yes, but that wasn't particularly the issue. The issue was that we were starting to see these sort of positions being ham-fisted into absolutely every game we're seeing. I mean, it's far too early to tell at the moment, but there's a possibility that it's going to be incorporated into GTA 6. Now, I don't know if that's going to be the case or not. I mean, they're good writing staff left after Red Dead Redemption 2. But even Red Dead 2 had some fairly progressive points of view in it. And I'm not just talking about slavery bad, by the way, that bit's fine. It's more Charles the Native American having a whole mission where he doesn't like the idea of hunters hunting bison, despite the fact that one, Arthur can hunt bison, and two, Native Americans used to just completely decimate entire buffalo herds just to get a few skins and a few scraps of meat. But as I say, this is one single mission in a game that takes people on average probably 100 hours to complete. Things like that really aren't a big deal, but if it expands from just a side mission that's a bit off, then starts to infect the main story, that's where things can go a bit wrong. I mean, you want a good example, just look at the new Saints Row game.
On the level of actual artists making the games, what? Big studio games are already highly mediated by what is going to appeal to a marketable audience, and for the smaller independent stuff, there's nothing wrong with appealing to a more niche crowd.
Okay, that's refuting absolutely nobody whatsoever. There's no one within Gamergate that made any point to the contrary there.
What does this have to do with ethics? And in the first place, game reviewers are more likely to be in a niche crowd because most people don't play everything that gets released.
Okay, the ethics aren't really to do with the creation of video games. The ethics are more to do with how video games journalists were talking about the gamers who did nothing wrong as if they're sexist. There were accusations that all gamers are sexist because they like Tomb Raider. And then obviously there were accusations that, as we say, they turned out not to be true, but Zoe Quinn was going around sleeping with games journalists to get good reviews. Obviously that never happened. However, it then dovetailed into an actual issue of big companies paying for good reviews for their games, and even the claim that IGN don't really do anything with their scores. They just give everything 7 out of 10s if the reviewer gets lazy. In short, journalists weren't doing their job properly. That's what people had an issue with, but if they're anything like me and they looked at proper journalism for quite a while, you'll know that journalists have never really done their job properly.
Gamergate spoke to a general feeling of dissatisfaction for a group that felt like they had this one isolated sphere where things were simple and catered specifically to them. The feeling that suddenly the floor was shifting from under them, that the taste both of the people making and talking about their favourite pop culture was changing.
Yes, part of Gamergate was indeed to gatekeep. There is nothing wrong with that, because it appears if you don't gatekeep, things get absolutely ruined in that sphere of things. I mean, look at any media franchise over the past 5 years. They've all been destroyed.
And from the sheer immensity of this feeling, a whole host of things were sucked into its orbit, strung together by conspiracies that admittedly rarely made sense on examination.
They also gave her a single same-sex love interest in the game's DLC, and that makes me think that maybe they made her ugly on purpose so that she could be a lesbian. Where's the lie?
Look, I've never played the Horizon series, but this really is probably a good example of what South Park is saying. Now, don't get me wrong, she was a female protagonist, but it goes a bit deeper than just put a chick in it and make her lame and gay. The chick was already there. From what I understand, people liked her. Again, I've never played the game, but I understand that people seem to like Horizon Zero Dawn. Now, when Forbidden West came out, people immediately were saying, why have they made her ugly? And obviously it seems to be a joke from this particular YouTuber that it was because she was a lesbian. But really I reckon it's more because video game artists don't seem to like the fact that porn is made. Rule 34 is invoked, I should say, from their attractive characters. So maybe they made her more ugly to stop having porn made of her. It's hard to say, but there is no doubt that they have made her more ugly in the sequel. And they apparently also made her a lesbian. And now, for all I know, this might not have affected the story. I don't know. The lesbian part also doesn't really matter to me, but the uglification, I can't give you a good reason why they would do that.
The rallying cry of the gamer didn't just become a unifying way to express disapproval at a feeling of being bullied out of their own space, but a way to make sense of the fact that this was both a movement against the silencing of dissenting voices that also loudly opposed any voice that expressed ideas outside of what made them comfortable.
I don't really understand how you can say that earlier in the video there are indie games that can fill in these niches and then at the same time say that there are dissenting voices that are silenced. By definition, they cannot be silenced if they are making that niche media. The problem gamers had with journalists is that they clearly hated them and wanted to completely change the face of mainstream games. They used to be all about fun and just quite unapologetically did appeal to young men and boys, and they want to try and force it to appeal to this new woke intersectional ideology instead. And the basis of that is simply just by pandering, by putting chicks in it, making them lame and gay, and then the writing part and the gameplay part matter way less. Now, this isn't to say that games coming out these days are bad in any way. In fact, we're having a pretty good time with games lately. But it tends to be the games that are accused less of being woke tend to be the better games. I mean, Starfield this year didn't even make it onto a mainstream awards shortlist, so that goes to show you how bad Bethesda are doing right now, and after they tried to brainwash people into thinking they weren't woke, when, I mean, there's been plenty of examples of non-white NPCs just flooding the background, pronouns being spotted everywhere, and somehow a clone of a man was turned into a woman without any sort of transitioning. Whereas most of the rest of the nominations for Game of the Year award haven't really been called woke. Baldur's Gate 3, Resident Evil 4, Super Mario Bros. Wonder, Zelda. I'm not seen anyone call any of them woke. The closest I guess we can get there is all the really weird and niche Zelda fans trying to make out that Link is some gay twink. But then you've also got Spider-Man 2. As far as I'm aware, the only bit people didn't particularly like about that game that was called woke was they made Mary Jane a bit more ugly. And I don't know why Alan Wake 2's there. From everything I've heard, it's just a terrible game. Well, in fact, having a quick look through if Alan Wake is woke, Alan Wake 2 apparently has a bit of wokery, because originally it was teased that the main character would be a white woman, and then it turned into a black woman. I mean, if you ask me, the only reason you would make a Finnish woman black is through sheer pandering. Point being that wokeness is quite clearly being rejected by even the mainstream gaming media these days. It's just past its sell-by date. And really, the quicker Jack Saint just comes to accept that, the better, but he's having a tough time trying to actually work out what it means from honest people like me, and even Critical Drinker and Nerdrotic are pretty honest about what they think woke means. And he doesn't seem to be able to accept that South Park really were trying to rag on it. I mean, honestly, I couldn't really tell you why he brought Gamergate into it. Like, it was the flashpoint where the tide turned on this sort of thing, sure, but when we come to the South Park episode, that's specifically about woke pandering, which I guess Gamergate was about too, to some extent, but that was really where during the latter days of Gamergate when this started to become a bit more obvious.
That this was a movement about people being cancelled for having opinions that opposed the message, while ruthlessly cancelling anyone who did not conform to their message, with review bombing and sock puppet accounts and, yes, an endless supply of death threats.
Yep, and big YouTubers on the Gamergate side condemned all of that. I don't know what you want.
The thing is, there were always justifiable reasons for the dissatisfaction on an industry level. Once again, corporations trying to influence journalism was actively happening.
So he said all this and at the same time is saying Gamergate had a point. Like, I don't know what he's saying. He's just brought up Gamergate and he keeps confusing what he's trying to say.
But because of that muddled message, rather than trying to defend real journalism, Gamergaters just rallied behind whoever had the same opinions on games as them.
I'm not being crazy here, but when they typically have a similar opinion to them on games, I imagine what that is actually code for is that they rallied around the journalists that were either pro-Gamergate or just didn't get involved. Because if you watch the PSA Sitch video, what they had a problem with was being abused by these journalists by calling them racist, calling them sexist, calling them XYZ. Of course they're going to rally around people who say, of course you're not all these slurs.
August Wilson said that colorblind casting was an aberrant idea that never had any validity other than as a tool of cultural imperialists who viewed their American culture, rooted in the icons of European culture, as beyond reproach in its perfection. We do not need colorblind casting. We need theaters. He made clear that he didn't speak on behalf of all black Americans, but he was highly critical of the concept of inclusion via switching in racial minorities into established stories in lieu of what he felt would be real progress.
Okay, just so you know, I skipped the rest of the Gamergate bit, it was really boring. He's getting back onto the subject of pandering, and yes, race swapping is absolutely pandering, and if anything I would agree with this quote. It is an insult to, well, if we're going to go along identity politics lines, non-white people, because why should you get the scraps of these established white characters? Why can't we create our own original characters that are non-white instead, and make them without having to denigrate others? That is a great question.
I mentioned earlier that political correctness existed as a term for about a century. Woke is actually even older, its origins in black culture dating at least as far back as the 1860 presidential election.
How are you over 20 minutes into a video about the end of wokery, and you are somehow only just getting onto the term woke? This video has been a complete mess. I have a genuine headache making this video. No one cares. No one cares where the origins of it come from. It evolved, as most words do, into meaning something else. Yes, originally it meant you were a politically engaged African American. That's made it develop into a current term, which is basically just a pejorative to mean a politically correct leftist. Yes. That is what woke means now. It didn't always mean that. It has evolved into something else, yes.
And one of the problems with how it has now been flattened into this really reductive label by conservatives is how easy it's become to miss the range of beliefs there actually are on this subject.
Oh my god, it's the classic, it's a right-wing cultural assault. No, it's the opposite again. The reason it became such a pejorative term by right-wingers is because left-wingers used it to mean absolutely anything. Think of the most ridiculous leftist position, and that will have been described as woke. Woke people supported things like affirmative action. They supported things like abortions for any reason up until birth. They supported having literally segregated schools again because they thought black kids would feel uncomfortable around white kids. Like, of course it became a pejorative. It's what people with absolutely crazy beliefs describe themselves as.
Because the thing is, it has rarely been easy for even token representation to actually make it to mainstream entertainment.
I mean, already, this is where your argument's falling over. How many people really care about representation? The whole point of the whole civil rights and Martin Luther King stories was that colourblindness is the way we should go. You can, and it is in fact good to see yourself as some fictional character when they are any skin colour. It doesn't matter. A black kid can see themselves as Peter Parker. A white woman can relate in some way to Black Panther. You know, things like that. That was the idea. But then we've somehow come all the way round back to a classic segregationist attitude of we can only relate to things and people that look like us. And it is a crazy outlook on life.
Constant financial reassurance had to be made even for Disney to give a white woman superhero a shot.
Like, is Jack Saint kidding me? Wonder Woman's been about since the 1940s. Literally for as long as Captain America. What do you mean give a white superhero a shot?
How hard it was to get any actual LGBT representation in media for young people is one of the first things I covered on this channel.
I don't really understand why you would be pushing for that sort of thing. Why is it important to you that kids are seeing gay people in media? Because all the reasoning we're coming out with recently is basically just to indoctrinate kids. Again, look at my video on Doctor Who recently. That's the only reason that Russell T Davies gives for putting a trans person front and centre of the 60th anniversary episode. Because he wants to see kids see trans kids.
But what's even harder is for creative people to get a chance to tell their own news stories in a market that's increasingly dominated by a smaller and smaller number of studios with an iron claw around their intellectual properties.
Hang on, just to reiterate what he said there, it's apparently at this point got harder for creative people to get into an industry that has essentially been monopolised. Right, I can understand that, but then he also then says that it is creatives to tell their own news stories, while in the same sentence says that these companies have an iron grip on their own IPs. Well, if you're making a new original story anyway, the grip on the IPs won't matter. And either way, I don't believe this at all. We are seeing way more people being employed by Disney as writers who have basically nothing under their belt. Netflix are greenlighting pretty much everything. South Park made a joke about that too. You're probably in the best time to try and get into the medium. It's always been difficult. Of course it's always been difficult, but it's probably easier than it ever has been now. And if you can't make it into it through the mainstream media, you've got YouTube. There have been entire channels that are dedicated to making sketches made in Gary's model, original animations that are purely there just for YouTube. It's easier than ever to be creative at this point.
Who are both extremely disconnected from the public and terrified of financial risk, even if the decisions they make due to that terror often lose them money anyway.
Yeah, well, they're learning the lesson of not being creative then, aren't they?
The problem with the Panda Stone is the same problem I see in a lot of people who talk about wokeness, and it's the same problem I had the first time I was suddenly arguing a lot about politics in popular media with Gamergate.
This should have been a section that was in the first 2 minutes of your video. How has it taken 25 minutes to finally get to something of substance? What is going on?
Strung along like a crowd of Randy Marshes, you talk about multiple things as if they are unified. You let these things be strung along together into one convenient narrative.
The only time I ever go back and watch Gamergate videos from, say, Sargon of Akkad or someone like that, the only time they bring up Zoe Quinn is because she said something stupid that week. I didn't actually know about the Zoe Quinn blog post until I saw PSA Sitch's video on it. That is how little I think Zoe Quinn had to do with Gamergate.
Put a chick in it and make it gay and lame is not about Disney executives trying to fight the trolls in the name of political justice. It's giant corporations making calculated decisions to reproduce the same material with superficial changes that have just enough new content to justify their own existence.
Yes, South Park make that point too. Before they were getting the hate mail, they were using the Panda Stone. They were using it a bit, saw the reaction and thought, oh, we have to do more. That's South Park's narrative there. I don't think it reflects what's really happened very well, but it is making the point that they are pandering, whatever the reason is, doesn't particularly matter, but they are doing it, it's making terrible media, and at the end of the day, Kathleen Kennedy in South Park realises she has to stop using the Panda Stone and actually make good content. And Cartman realises that he has to up his game when it comes to the criticisms of said content. And that is a fine lesson to have. But if you think that their point was the only reason they're pandering is to dunk on the trolls, then you took the wrong message from it.
I feel like it's also worth adding that they do a better job of the same thing with the subplot for Stan's dad. There's no need to indicate that anything happening with the handyman has anything to do with some emotional grudge or bitter feud. It's just the outcome of a material reality that makes sense at the time.
Yes, except what the B-plot handyman are doing isn't out of any particular ideological kind of status climbing that is exactly what Disney are trying to do. They're trying to get the top of the status by pandering. That's the point, and that's the point I think South Park should have gone on, but obviously the writers don't think that that's the reason for all this woke pandering. And to be honest, there might be something in it, given how much the media writes about trolls online. That part of the incentive is to BTFO internet trolls and racists, or whatever they think of them. But even then, they're not making it obvious that it's for status climbing. They are trying to state that it's Kathleen Kennedy's moral imperative to try and BTFO Eric Cartman's racism.
It's a trend that isn't even really born out of any sense of social justice, because most creative people who care about that aren't dreaming of the day they get to do a boring remake of an old Disney movie or a rushed out superhero movie they barely get any creative control over anyway.
Yes, no, the people who care about that are in the activist class, and are the type that literally just want to see right-wingers going off their nut about this sort of thing. That's their moral imperative, just to annoy or even worse, banish from society the type of people that they hate because they think right-wingers are evil. But Jack Saint really needs to make it obvious that there are definitely levels of wokeness in different bits of media. Quantum Mania, for example, didn't have an awful lot of wokeness. I think the most egregious bit of that is just a young girl who's an expert in quantum mechanics by the age of 20-odd and somehow manages to make a transporter to the quantum world. In her basement, by the way. Just obvious absurdity. But then you can get even worse wokery like you would see in the film Karen, where the black people never do anything wrong and the white people are all Confederate-loving cops as well, by the way, but also the white woman is just a Karen who hates black people. And that's the whole film, black people defending themselves from absolutely crazy white people.
I mean, yes, undeniably there is an audience of young people who do feel empowered by that kind of representation, and I don't see why anyone should object to that kind of positive feeling.
People can like what they want. That's not what anyone has a problem with. People have a problem with you are writing bad shows and clearly trying to pander to a woke audience. We'd like you to stop that and actually write things well again. No one in the history of the world, not even the far right, have said that they have a problem with Black Panther appealing to black people. Their problem is when they denigrate others for it. An example in the Black Panther film is that one of the Wakandans calls a white person a colonizer, despite the fact that Wakanda is a very isolationist nation. It doesn't really contact the outside world at all. And the reason Wakanda got so big is because it colonized other tribes around their own. So that is an example of something not making any sense in the world and clearly just being there as an excuse for a black person to call a white person a colonizer. That's a small-scale example of woke. It's something that would come from the Panda Stone.
But that's not what corporations are motivated by. If they cared about art and its impact on people, they wouldn't be cancelling labours of love left and right for a tax write-off.
I think every piece of media that is used as representation is a labour of love. I don't think you can conflate those two things. I don't think James Cameron made Avatar for representation, but it's clearly a labour of love. Whereas I think The Marvels was there as part of a representation drive, and yet clearly was not a labour of love.
They do the lazy retreads because that's what they think guarantees them the best chance of financial success.
Right, okay, you've also got to address why the main push they have for these remakes is the representation and diversity, and the fact they're getting rid of problematic old story tropes. Why do you think that is? Why would they market it that way? If it's just for money, I think you're crazy. Unless somehow every single time they do market research, they somehow only do it around Hollywood. That is the only way I'm going to accept that argument.
And if you stop seeing it as this one unifying thing, if you can let go of this woke menace that lets you get pandered into supporting obvious actual government censorial authoritarian bullshit and focus on this, maybe we can start to focus our efforts on these monoliths that are actually creating these problems.
What is your point here? I'm trying to work out what your point is. You started this whole video off by saying, I like the word narrativizing, and you have not made a clear narrative here at all. What I think you are saying here is that when people say woke, they actually mean one of quite a few different things. I will agree with that. Representation can mean representation of women, of black people, of the gays, whatever. And there can be some conflicting things within that. We are seeing that mainly between the TERFs and the trans at the moment. However, if you think the problem is with the especially incredibly large YouTube channels that their problem is they are seeing black people or trans people in their shows, then you have got the whole argument wrong. But you've already accepted that they are not only saying that. You might not think that of Nerdrotic or Az, for example, but you certainly thought of that as the most popular person, which is Critical Drinker. So you know it's a little bit more complicated than that, but for some reason you don't seem to get that someone like Ron DeSantis is very popular because people are seeing these types of pandering outside of media as well. They're seeing it in their schools, they're seeing it in their place of work, they're seeing it every time they go into a government building, and they're fed up of it. So you've really got to go a bit beyond your blind spots here, because you've really not got a good grasp on what the issue actually is from people on this side of the argument. And because you've not done that, you've not only made a straw man, but you've not even really addressed the straw man either. I don't understand what the point you're making is, aside from just, I don't like big corporations. But again, I could have guessed that because I know you're a leftist.
To break the panda stone and become a Randy Marsh for good.
That's it, by the way. That's the end of his video. I thought it would be a bit more entertaining than that, but he's not really said anything. I don't know what my conclusion can be. I'm not shocked a leftist YouTuber doesn't understand what they're talking about when they're trying to argue against people who say things are woke. I have no idea what I can do with this, I'm afraid. I don't know what my conclusion can be. So I guess catch me on Regional Variations a little bit later. Catch me on Laughing at the Guardian Saturday. This video was god-awful. As an apology, I'll even make a third one this week. I'm so sorry I put you through that. If you managed to make it this far, thank you very much for watching. I understand that this was very taxing. I literally had a headache going through this, and I cut out a hell of a lot of that video too. But with that, that's everything I've got for you today. I'm just stunned into silence. I guess with that, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.